wanted to make sure everyone was able to get in to this meeting. We have 76 participants here and about 30 on Facebook, and it'll continue to grow. So let me welcome everybody. Welcome. My name is Andre Dickens. I am an Atlanta City Council member from Post 3 at large. I also have the honor and privilege of being your Atlanta City Council member that represents as the Transportation Committee Chairman. And I've been the Transportation Committee Chairman for the last 3 years, and I thank my colleagues for allowing me to do so. Also on this call so far, I see a few other council members. I see Council Member Marcy Collier Overstreet. She serves as the Vice Chairwoman of the Transportation Committee, and she's done that for the last 3 years as well. And we're also joined by Dustin Hillis. He represents District 9. And as other council members join in, I'll make sure I make mention of them. Please make sure I do. We're also here joined by my great staff. My Chief of Staff, Everett Steele, is letting you all into this great party and help set all this up. We also have Lauren Page Finn and Kelsey Maynor. And then we have from council staff, Julia Pulandini. Whenever you guys come to City Hall, you see her running our meetings from a legislative standpoint. And then we have Zena Lewis, who is our council communications person. And there may be more that's going to join, so forgive me if I don't mention everyone. But welcome to this town hall. This is very important. Now, all of us are quarantining. We would normally do this meeting in person, in City Hall and council chambers, but this is such an important topic that we did not want to let the time go by without us still addressing Vision Zero. And this city is moving fast in the direction of mobility and safety. And we have a lot of great community partners, and some of them will speak today. And we have a presentation from a few of them. We also, of course, have our great leadership in the Atlanta Department of Transportation. That will be led by Josh Rowan, the Commissioner of the Department of Transportation, and his team. He will hand it over to them to speak about Vision Zero. We're also joined by our great Tim Peake from the Atlanta Police Department. Deputy Chief Peake, he's going to speak related to how Vision Zero, our 25 miles per hour, how the enforcement angle of this will take place from the Atlanta Police Department's perspective. Again, we will also hear from the Atlanta DOT Josh Rowan and Doug Nagy. And we'll also hear from stakeholders, leaders in the community from Atlanta Bicycle Coalition. That'll be by Rebecca Cerna. We'll also have an NPU leader and APAB leader, Eunice Glover, who has a wealth of knowledge, and she'll tell you about that. And then we'll also have Doug Joyner from Safe Routes to School. He's going to talk about our youth and how safety is important to them. We in Atlanta have a number of roads that are in a high injury network. We have been talking about the need to improve mobility and safety. That was sort of part of the impetus to lead me to want to create an Atlanta Department of Transportation over 2 years ago. And thankfully, with the leadership of Mayor Bottoms and the rest of the Atlanta City Council, we drove towards that end, and now we have an Atlanta Department of Transportation. And this is some of the results that we wanted everyone to have, where we would be leading by safety, mobility, and thinking about the complete street and the complete transportation grid. So we ask that you continue to write in your questions. I may need to defer to Everett to speak about how they can get their questions heard. Also, Everett, be prepared. I'm seeing some people asking about how can they call in and submit questions or to listen to it if they don't have a device that they can Zoom in. So before I throw this over to Josh Rowan, I want to go to Everett still for 1 second to talk about some logistical items related to the community and how you can have your questions answered, and also have maybe the opportunity for you to tell a friend that does not have Zoom how they might can listen in. Everett, do you have something to share about that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Council Member. If you are having trouble with the audio or looking for another option, we do not have a call-in number as we're trying to get the maximum number of people on here, and just it's a limitation of the software. But if you go to the Facebook page for Atlanta City Council, it is being live streamed on there, and should allow for an unlimited amount of people to check in via that platform. In terms of getting your questions in, you can submit them in chat here. You can submit them on the Facebook page, on Twitter, or you can actually text them to 404-326-8744, and I will put that number in the chat here as well.
Great, thank you, Everett. And I'd be remiss to also I've neglected to mention that we have Robin Hutchison here. She's not in Atlanta. She's going to give us some insight on how Vision Zero is taking shape in a whole nother state. And I don't want to steal her thunder, so I'll just tease that fact that we have Vision Zero is across the nation, and we're going to hear from some experts in another state. So stay tuned for that. So one, I welcome all of you again to this. Now let's get down to it so you can learn about where Atlanta is going. Our city council members have already, in the transportation committee, we've already passed legislation unanimously out of the transportation committee. And so on Monday, it will go before full council. And so we wanted to hear back from the community, share with you more about this in this town hall format. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce Atlanta's very first commissioner for the Atlanta Department of Transportation, Josh Rowan. Josh, if you could, go ahead and take over.
All right, well, thank you, Chairman Dickens. A couple things I'd like to add on to just the comments about Department of Transportation. If everyone's had an opportunity, or if you haven't, I encourage you to download the One Atlanta Department of Transportation strategic plan. One of the things that this plan signifies is a real shift from a project by project type basis to actually implementing the plan from a citywide perspective. And that's the safety, the equity, mobility discussions we've had in the past will really shape the decisions we make going forward. And so I wanted to just share a couple of things from the plan before I turn it over to Doug and Betty to give our presentation. But this was actually from the letter that the Mayor Bottoms penned at the beginning. I just want to read an excerpt here where it talks about a safe, welcoming, and inclusive city committed to ending tragic traffic fatalities through an improved understanding of our streets. And that's really what brings us here today, is to talk about ending tragic traffic fatalities. And right out of the chute, our very first goal under a safe, welcoming, and inclusive city, the first bullet point is to develop a Vision Zero program for Atlanta. And that is just what we've done. And the thing I'd like to remind everyone is this is not a one-stop shop. If you look at the European cities who've made similar commitments, it's a generational commitment. It's taken places like Oslo, Norway, almost a quarter of a century to go from where Atlanta is down to a point where they have minimal fatalities, in fact, achieving zero this past year. So we really want to engage with the community and encourage you to understand that there's not a quick fix here. This is a systematic thing that's going to be adopted citywide, and we ask for everyone's support and commitment as we move into the years together to implement Vision Zero. So with that, we want to give a brief presentation on what went into this legislation, and then talk a little bit about next steps. So with that, I'd like to introduce Doug Nagy, who is our Deputy Commissioner for Planning and Strategy within the Atlanta Department of Transportation. And then also Betty Smoot-Madison, who, even though it's not quite official yet, she will be our Vision Zero leader within the Atlanta Department of Transportation. So they will take the show from here.
Thank you, Josh, and good evening, everyone. This is Doug Nagy. I'm looking forward to walking you through this presentation. For our portion of the presentation, we have three goals. Can you go flip to the page 2? Perfect. So we want to share learnings from our research on traffic speed and safety. We have a lot of data of where safety issues exist in the city of Atlanta, what the current speeds are, how we stack up against other cities, and we want to share that. 2, we want to explain the details of the proposed legislation, what it will do, and all of that. And 3, we'll be available at the end to answer any questions that you'll have. So if we go to the next page, I think this is the most important metric because it shows how safe we are in terms of traffic deaths versus other cities. And so you could consider this, so basically this chart shows other major cities in the United States, and this is collected nationally by the U.S. Department of Transportation. So the methodology is exactly the same in these cities, so it's quite benchmarkable. But you'll see that our rate of people who die in traffic deaths, that's including drivers, pedestrians, passengers, all of that, is 3 times higher than similar cities to us like Seattle, Minneapolis, and Boston. You'll see that even our pedestrian death rate, that's the amount of people walking through our city that die per 100,000 people, is actually higher than the overall death rate from all traffic crash victims in Seattle and Minneapolis. And so if we were a fire department, we would say this is a 5-alarm fire that we have, and it's a very alarming how high our death rate is compared to other cities. You'll find that generally the Sunbelt cities, you see Dallas and Austin on here, are higher than some of the older traditional cities like New York or Boston. But if you look at the gap between Dallas and Austin, here's 2 cities in the same state, and one has a Vision Zero program, one doesn't. And you could see some of the results there already that Austin is dramatically better than Dallas, and Austin's dramatically better than Atlanta. So I don't know if we'll be able to get to as safe as New York City. We're a dramatically different city, but certainly we can start moving in the correct direction. And people are dying, and so we need to move as quickly as possible. There's a question here: why are the sunlight cities higher? The Sun Belt cities. So those were traditionally developed during the age of cars. So they have wider roads, faster speeds than a city like New York or Philadelphia, which was built around horses and walking, and then retrofitted for cars. And so you'll just see that throughout a lot of statistics. So for instance, how many people take transit is much higher in the older cities than it is in the Sun Belt and newer cities. So if you move to the next slide, this is some statistics from our own police department of how many people died last year in traffic crashes. And you'll see that 73 people died. So this is a dramatic public health crisis in our city. The largest percentage of people that die are actually the people inside the vehicles. That's 40. But then we had 22 pedestrians die. So here's people that are just walking around our city trying to get home, trying to get to work, trying to get to where they're going. And they got hit by a car or hit by a vehicle and died. Then we also had 7 motorcyclists, 3 scooters, and 1 bicyclist die. So it's quite alarming. And we want to dig into each of these buckets and see what are the key drivers and what can we improve to bring this dramatically down. Then if we see the next slide, you'll see a map of where these incidents occurred. And I've seen a lot of maps of the city, and typically you have this north-south divide of incomes, race, those sorts of things. But you'll see here with traffic violence that actually affects everyone in the city, whether you live in Bankhead or Buckhead, Southwest Atlanta, East Atlanta. We have these incidences occurring all throughout the city. So this is an important safety measure so that everyone can feel safe in their neighborhood and be safe in their neighborhood. If we flip to the next page, and you'll see that 46% of Atlantic's traffic deaths over the last, 5 years, 6 years, occurred on GDOT corridors. So that's to say that there's certain streets in the city, Moreland, Hallowell, some others that are owned or managed by the state. They're responsible for paving, they're responsible for the design, they're responsible for the speed limit, a lot of these. And so any effort to reduce traffic deaths in the city of Atlanta, we need to get close participation with the Georgia Department of Transportation. We're already working with them on several corridors in the city on improvements, and they're very focused on safety as well. And we're working with them so that they can develop a more urban mentality in how we design our streets. And so one of our goals in this will be really engaging the state in improving those corridors that they're responsible for. Then on the next page, it has two kind of data points. One is the data point from our Atlanta Police Department. The Atlanta Police Department investigates every serious traffic crash in the city and does analysis of it. And their analysis of these traffic crashes show that 54% of the crashes that caused deaths involved high speeds or people speeding. And so you can see that speed is a key driver in terms of why Atlanta's rate of traffic deaths is so high. And then if you look at the main content on the slide, you see this graphic 20, 30, 40, and that's from the National NACTO, the National Transportation Officials Organization. And it shows that the faster you're going, the higher the risk is for people to die, pedestrians to die in a traffic incident. And there's two key drivers of why speed is so dangerous. Number one, it reduces the amount of time people have to react, so it increases the likelihood of a crash because people can't react in time. And two, it increases the severity of the crash. And so that's what this chart shows here, is if you're a pedestrian and you get hit by a vehicle going 20 miles an hour, you have a 90% chance that you'll live. If you get hit by a vehicle going 40 miles an hour, there's a 90% chance that you'll die. And if we think of our Atlanta streets, there's much more frequently people going more towards the 40 or dramatically over the 40 miles an hour on our local roads versus the left side of the spectrum in 20. And so reducing speeds throughout the city is very important. And one of the things is that every time there's a traffic crash, it also creates a lot of congestion in our city. And so if people would take their time getting to where they're going, it would also improve the flow of traffic in our city because you wouldn't have as many backups due to crashes. And so a lot of times we see people accelerating between lights and they're not really getting to their destination any faster. They're just getting there in a more dangerous mode. And so reducing speeds is a very important aspect of what the Atlanta Department of Transportation will be focused on. And now I want to turn it over to Betty Smoot-Madison, who's a member of our Atlanta Department of Transportation team. And we're very lucky to have her help here in Atlanta because she previously worked on pedestrian safety and traffic safety and automated speed enforcement in the city of Baltimore. And so here's someone that now lives in Atlanta, has worked in the city for about 2 years, and we're very lucky to have her expertise. So Betty, do you want to take over at this point?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. But this is exciting, especially to see this level of turnout on the town hall tonight. So thank you guys for putting this together. We'll go on to the next slide. So Vision Zero is going to be basically a very bold commitment to eliminating serious injuries and fatalities on our city streets. And it's really going to require the city to be very strategic and data-driven about allocation of funding and resources and the types of projects that we deliver over the long term. And so as Josh mentioned before, not only is Vision Zero sort of a core principle of the One Atlanta Strategic Transportation Plan, but it aligns with transportation goals at all levels, from federal to state to regional. And so Vision Zero recognizes that roadway safety or sort of the lack thereof is a public health crisis because fatal crashes are preventable. And studies have shown that very intentional and strategic policy decisions can really flatten the curve. And so the legislation that we have before council, it will do a number of things. It formally adopts Vision Zero as our roadway safety program. And we'll proudly say that we're amongst the transportation leaders in other leading cities across the nation. And then the legislation states that we will create a Vision Zero task force. So that task force will be comprised of a number of the most essential partners that will really help DOT drive and implement change through this program. And then the legislation also adopts NACTO, Urban Street Design Guide, which NACTO is the National Association of City Transportation Officials. And so they've put out a number or published a number of design guidelines for urban streets. And so we will formally adopt those guidance and really start to implement them as a part of redesign of our corridors, some of the city's most dangerous corridors and intersections. And then finally, the legislation will implement a default speed limit of 25 miles per hour on certain streets. which Doug will actually dive a little bit deeper into shortly. Next slide. And so briefly, this Vision Zero sort of started over 20 years ago in Sweden and other European cities, and eventually made its way to the US over the last 10 years or so. And so many of the first adapters were some of the larger cities, such as New York and Chicago and San Francisco, and many others. And so this map was borrowed from the Vision Zero network, and it shows some of the current adapters across the US. And we're really looking forward to having Atlanta join some of our neighboring cities, such as Macon and Charlotte and Orlando, to really just, again, be amongst the transportation leaders. Furthermore, many of these Vision Zero cities have reported successes. For example, Boston saw a significant reduction from 2016 to 2017, where they saw the biggest drop in fatal crashes, and they are continuing to see declines year by year since then by implementing things such as reduced default speed limits, implementing neighborhood slow zones, and various traffic calming measures and intersection improvements. Another great example, as Josh mentioned before, is Oslo, Norway. Again, they were one of the earlier adapters. And so they actually reached zero just last year, and having 0 pedestrian and bicycle fatalities. And so they were, again, able to reach that goal through years of commitment through their Vision Zero program. And they implemented very similar sort of strategies and treatments as Boston. So lowering speeds, expanding its bicycle network, and then adding traffic calming measures around schools. So we really have some great leaders to look forward to and to look towards when we start to implement some of our strategies. Many of these cities are sharing their lessons learned, and it really will help us, I think, start out of the box with some great stuff. And we'll really start to see change on our city streets sooner. Next slide. And I'll briefly touch on this slide. Actually just sort of shows what our initial framework would be for Vision Zero, and it sort of uses a 6E framework. And this will continue to evolve, especially as we begin working with the task force. But essentially just wanted to show that Vision Zero is going to be a toolkit of innovative strategies and actions and policies that the city and its partners can implement. And it's going to range everything from just making sure equity is integrated into everything that we do. Of course, engineering is going to be one of the biggest and most critical pieces of that, and making sure that we really start to rethink how our streets are designed. And then enforcement, again, looking at automated enforcement, such as speed cameras and red light cameras, and then just working with our law enforcement partners really closely. And then, of course, education, outreach, and engagement. Again, just working with, really utilizing some engagement and outreach strategies where we can touch everyone, all users of the roadway. One of the things that we really was proud of with Josh was that when he first came on board with ATL-DOT, he sort of personally challenged himself to only drive 25 miles per hour when he's in the city. And so I think if each of us sort of took on that commitment to make sort of a personal commitment and challenge, we really will start to see that's really what cultural change is about. And we really will start to see a difference in crashes going down. All right, and then emergency response, again, just working with our first responders, Atlanta Fire Rescue and APD, as well as local hospitals, just to make sure we're coming up with the best strategies and utilizing best practices when responding to crashes and being able to provide sort of life-saving care as quickly as possible. And then the evaluation component of this is really just monitoring the data before and after treatments or before and after construction. And so really just monitoring to see how effective some of this, this program has been overall. All right, next slide. All right, and I'll just briefly touch on this. So again, one of the big next steps for Vision Zero after the ordinance is passed is to really get started with work with the Atlanta Vision Zero Task Force. And so I just really want to reiterate the importance of multidisciplinary collaboration and cooperation. It's going to be instrumental in the success of our Vision Zero program. And so we really just look forward to working with the various government agencies and community stakeholders that will be a part of this program. And next slide, and I'll actually turn it back over to Doug.
Thank you, Betty. So one of the things council had asked us of us, and Councilman Dickens under his leadership asked us to look at what should the speed limit ought to be on the roads in Atlanta, and so that result is embedded in this presentation. And so we researched the whole history of why the streets have the speeds that they have in the city of Atlanta, and essentially the city hasn't taken a comprehensive view of what should the speed ought to be on all streets of the same type since the 1970s. And so it's a well past due time to review what should the streets be. But since the comprehensive policies in the 70s, they've been amended 140 times by different council members changing speeds in their district, traditionally almost entirely to lower speeds to the response of residents that wanted to slow traffic through their neighborhoods. And so in effect today, what you end up having is you have streets of the same character that end up with different speeds. So if you look at this pictures here, these are all from Google Street View. And you can see this first row is local streets. So those are the smallest neighborhood streets in the city. And most of them are 25, but you'll find some that are 30, some that are 35. And it makes sense that, streets of the same character ought to have the same speed. We would say 25. On the next slide, not the next slide, one up, sorry. Go back to that slide. You see collectors, which are a little bit bigger than local roads, and they also could be 25, 30, 35, and we want to see those consolidated at a lower speed there. And so one of the things we want to do with this is create the expectation of this type of street has this type of speed and have consistency in our policy with the city. The next slide. So one of the things that's happened across the country is cities are lowering their speed limits. And so one of the first easiest things to do in terms of how easy it is to implement is lowering speed limits. And so you'll see Seattle, Portland, Boston have all adopted standard speed limits across the city. Portland's even lowered them twice, first from 30 to 25, then from 25 to 20. Under Georgia law, the lowest we can possibly go is 25, short of a change in this from the state legislature. So you won't hear us discuss some 20 because of that. And we also want to see what's the result of lowering the speeds for Atlanta. But you'll see that, the cities that we want to be like in terms of traffic death rates, Seattle, Boston, these types of cities are already adopting many of these policies. And so it's a well-established best practice to lower the speeds. Next. And so this is the consistency. So basically I want to explain that there's essentially 4 different types of roads that we can think about in the city. There's local roads and collectors, which you saw in the previous one. And then there's arterial streets that are the bigger 2 to 3 lane, sometimes 4 lanes, weirdly, streets that go through our city. And we kind of divide those and we talk about them from downtown arterials. And this mainly means Midtown, downtown, Atlanta University Center, Georgia Tech, that core area, almost inside the Beltline would be a rough way of describing that. And then you have outlying arterials that are your long streets like Campbellton, Hollowell, those types of streets. And typically what cities do is they lower the default speed limit for local roads, collectors, and downtown arterials. And then on the outlying arterials, they study them one by one because they're very different in their character. So for instance, in Atlanta, if you looked at, Piedmont, where it runs right through the middle of Georgia State and downtown Atlanta, that might be very different than Fulton Industrial Boulevard, which has big trucks going up and down it and not that many pedestrians there in the city. And so that's what the difference between in-city or in-town arterials and out of town arterials, and then our outlying arterials. And then outlying arterials are very different from one another. So that's why it makes sense to study each of them individually to see what the adopted speed should be. So next slide. so this is the key slide to understand the speed limit policy, and this is the first step that we want to take for lowering speed limits in the city. But it'll probably be the first of many. And there's some complexities with the state law, and so we want to explain how the state law works and what our choices are as a city. So essentially, if we start right to left, there's GDOT roads, which are managed by the state, and GDOT sets the speed limit there. The city has no legal authority to change the speed. So we're only going to be able to change the speed there through persuasion. To get very technical about it, the state typically uses all methods that are called the 85th percentile, which looks at how fast are cars going today and says that's what the speed ought to be. But it never looks at roads saying, well, what should the speed ought to be, irregardless of how fast cars are going today. And so we need to work with the state to persuade them that Atlanta is different, that we should have a different way of setting speeds. And so with GDOT, it'll be a persuasion campaign from us to them to try to lower those speeds, but that's not currently covered in this legislation. Then on the far left, you have streets that are city controlled that are not on the state laser list. So to enforce speed in Georgia, a police department has to do two types of certification. One, each officer has to get certified in laser enforcement, how to use the radar gun. And two, each segment of roadway needs to get certified to enforce laser. I'm not from Georgia, so I couldn't believe it when I saw this law, but that's how it functions in the state. And so there's a big, long 26-page PDF of what roads are on the state laser list and which roads are not on the state laser list. And if you change the speed on any road in the state laser list, you basically lose your right to enforce the speed limit on those roads with laser. So if you look at this left column, these are city streets that have never been put on the state laser list. And so this is about 550 signs in the city that are above 25 on these streets. And we want to lower them all to 25. And we can do that without losing any enforcement capability that we have today, because we don't have the laser enforcement capability on these streets. And so that's consolidating all the local roads, all the collectors, all the downtown arterials that fall 100% in our autonomy to that. In outlying arterials, there's really only one street in the whole city that falls in that bucket, and we're going to be calling Councilman Hillis about it because it falls in his district, and that's in the outlying arterials bucket. And so we'll be talking with Councilman Hillis's office about what should the speed ought to be on Marietta Boulevard out there. But essentially, this is a big step. This first one is saying everywhere we have complete autonomy, let's lower the speed to 25. Where it gets a little bit complicated is this middle area, these are city streets that we are in charge of the maintenance, the design, all of that, but are on the state laser list. And so what we have an ugly choice in this column, is we can do one of two things to lower the speed limit. One, we can lower the posted speed limit and remove it from the state laser list, saying, I believe the lower speed limit posted sign will lower speeds, or I can keep the speed as it is and keep up my ability to do automated, or not, to do laser speed enforcement on these streets. And so it's pretty tough choice here, because there's not a formal study that we could find that said, is it better to do posted speeds or better to do enforcement? It's not been studied really there. Although, so basically, when we were speaking with the police, we came to the agreement that, and specifically when speaking with the police, we're speaking with the motors unit, the unit that does the speed enforcement, that on local roads, it would make most sense to lower the speed limit to 25 throughout the city. So if people know they're driving through a local neighborhood, that they need to be driving 25. And then we'll study further collectors and downtown arterials and outlying arterials there. It'll essentially, to replace the 1,000 signs here, it's going to take our operations team about 6 to 9 months anyways to do that. And so we hope by the time we finish that, erecting all these 25-mile-an-hour speed limits, we'll be able to have more information and have further conversations and study of the collectors and downtown arterials that are on the state laser list here. But that's why it's so complicated. We want to show on one page what we're doing. So in summary, every street that falls entirely in our domain, we want to lower it to 25, other than the outlying arterials, which we'll do a separate piece of legislation for Marietta Boulevard. Then on the city streets with the state laser list, lowering all the ones on local roads to 25, and then studying for the collectors and downtown arterials and outlying arterials on these. And so that's when we're saying we're lowering the speed limit, what the legislation has. If you want to go to the next slide. So there is, so one of the questions that our own police force asked us in these meetings was, does changing the posted speed limit really change driver behavior? And they were actually skeptical at first, but there's been actually a study of this that it does reduce how fast cars are going. And so this is the results from Boston. Seattle has experienced similar results where speeding has actually come down just from changing the sign. So lowering speeds is like, it will take a multiple lever approach, right? Lowering the posted speed limit, enforcing a bit more, particularly with automated speed enforcement, so it addresses the equity issues of traffic stops, engineering, how, if we take a car lane, narrow the lanes, add a bike lane, add a protected bike lane, that can slow traffic, signal timing. There's a lot of different levers that we have. But what this slide is saying is that lowering the posted speed limit is an important lever, and one that we ought to do first, since it's one of the easier things to do. Next slide. So the next steps for us is the complete adoption of the legislation. That will be where Atlanta officially says we're going to be a Vision Zero city, aspiring to eliminate all traffic deaths and fatalities. B, in terms of the Atlanta Department of Transportation, we'll have a lot of work to do of ordering, printing, and replacing a bunch of those signs. There'll be about 1,000 signs with this legislation. And C, we're going to be developing a Vision Zero action plan where we look at, how are we doing versus other cities? What are the biggest levers that we can do to reduce speeds and reduce traffic deaths in our city? And where are those hot spots in our city that we should most invest in? And so those are the next steps from our end. I could turn it back over to you guys.
Okay, great. Thank you from everyone at the Department of Transportation. That was great information. Thank you, Josh and team. There's been some questions coming in, so we'll get to those questions shortly at the end of this presentation. Josh, did you want to add anything to cap off the end of the presentation from your team, or should we go on to Deputy Chief Peak? Oh, Everett, you have to unmute Josh. There he is.
No, sir, I think we're good. Doug and Betty did a great job, and we probably used a little more than our fair share of time, but we wanted to get into a lot of the details of what's behind this legislation that's moving forward. So we will sit back and listen.
Okay, all right, good deal. All right, so now we want to hear from APD, a very important part of our engagement in the community, but also the enforcement of this Vision Zero. So Deputy Chief Peak, are you still with us? I see you.
Yes, sir. Yes, I'm still here.
Good. Thank you for participating today. Thanks to Chief Shields for always being dedicated and committed to our safety measures. And she wanted to make sure that APD was represented. And so we have Deputy Chief Peak. Tell us about how APD will enforce.
So thank you, Councilman Dickens. We certainly are concerned and want to ensure that we provide as safe streets as possible for the city of Atlanta. So what this means for APD, of course, it's been a pretty good explanation already prior to, for those streets that will lower 225. So we will not be able to utilize the actual electronic means of laser or radar, which is kind of obsolete already, but we would lose those enforcement maneuvers. However, with the lower street signs, we would hope that we would certainly have slower traffic. Now, on part two of that is there are specific people who are equipped with APD to be able to utilize what we call just a visual speed detection, where the officer has been trained to look at a vehicle and determine, basically off of his expertise, how fast that vehicle is going, and he can make that charge with that method. Or we could also do pacing to try to slow traffic down. pacing is a little bit harder to do at a slow rate of speed because you just don't have the opportunity of covering a specific amount of territory to ensure that you have the best pacing speed that's possible. And it also requires that we ensure that we keep our vehicles certified as well to ensure that there are no issues with that, which we already do. So we can certainly do that and still have a pretty good tool of enforcement. And then one of the other things that we can also do is to go back to the state with that lower speed being 25, find out what does it take to see if they can come back out and resurvey and recertify the area to see if there's a possibility that we can utilize the laser method with that 25 miles an hour. But that would certainly be up to the state if they would be willing to grant that authority for us.
Great. Good deal. Good deal. So as we roll this out, as Mr. Nagy said, it's going to take about 9 months to change out 1,000 signs. I will make sure that I would imagine that Josh and team will make sure that APD is aware as we are rolling this out, as we are changing speed limits to 25 miles per hour, that, you know, your officers are aware, you know, so that we don't have any hiccups where, you know, someone is thinking it's 25 and that street hasn't been changed yet, and, you know, you get into tickets and arguments. But I think constant, you know, close communication will be necessary on that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what it will probably require as well is, so we have probably some hundreds of forms out there that he spoke of that shows us the list of streets that are governed by the laser use. What we would have to do is probably go back and update that list, and as those streets change, we would just pull those streets off of the enforcement by laser altogether, and we'd have to push that training back out and ensure that everyone's trained and notified. Because what we don't want to do is to have someone go out and write citations and then we are in violation of the state, and what that will do in turn is it will pull us from the entire program, and we certainly don't want to do that. So we want to make sure everybody is up to speed with training and knowledge of what's happening prior to. The goal would be is to get them trained prior to that start date so that we already know.
Right, right. All right, good deal. Is there anything else that you wanted to share?
No, sir, that's about it. We're in the process. We're in the business of enforcing, so we're here.
Okay.
We're save lives.
All right, good deal. And just for the public's information, I did get a call from the Atlanta Fire Rescue Department, and they did say that they were in support of Vision Zero. They see the other unfortunate side of accidents and having to help people and to rescue them and to provide assistance and CPR and even, you know, try to get them on the mend if they have been involved in an accident, whether they're pedestrian or cyclist, et cetera. So they are, of course, aware of more speed equals higher injuries or even more fatalities. So the Fire Rescue Department called today to say, did I want to add them to the to this presentation? If we didn't have additional time, just make sure they were on record saying they were in support and definitely willing to do whatever they needed to do to be helpful to the citizens of Atlanta. So both our public safety agencies are committed to safety. Thank you, Deputy Chief P. All right, and so now it's time to hear from some of our stakeholders. But before I do that, Josh, did you want to go to Robin first? Robin, did you want to talk about Minneapolis now, or did you want to wait? What do you think, Josh? I forgot.
Let's go to some stakeholders and then bring NACTO in at the very end to wrap it up.
Okay, we'll bring NACTO in at the end. All right, let's go to Rebecca Cerna of the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition. Rebecca has been, and the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition have been major advocates for safety and mobility in general, not just bicycles, not just scooters, et cetera, but all modes of transportation, making sure that we're safe. And Rebecca and team have been a part of, when we decided to create the Atlanta Department of Transportation, we had them at the table to help us plan things out. So Rebecca, if you could walk us through your presentation as it relates to Vision Zero.
Sure. Thank you so much for including us. And if my 3 boys come running through the background screaming in 5 minutes, I'll know that's my time. So a little bit about us, the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition. Bicycle is in our name, and for 30 years, we've worked to make biking safe, accessible, and appealing in the city of Atlanta. But in 2018, because of changes in the environment where we work, our board of directors voted to consider expanding our focus to include, in addition to biking, walking, public transportation, and safe streets more broadly. So last year we worked with our stakeholders and community members to adopt a new strategic plan that takes us beyond bikes. Our new mission: reclaim Atlanta streets as safe, inclusive, and thriving spaces for people to walk, ride, and roll. We envision an Atlanta where everyone moves safely, easily, and sustainably throughout the city. Key to that vision is making Atlanta a Vision Zero city. So how did we get here? Well, a small number of Atlanta's streets are the ones where most people are killed and seriously injured. Less than 8% of Atlanta's streets account for 88% of traffic fatalities. That's traffic fatalities of all kinds. People in cars, behind the wheel, people who are passengers in cars, people walking, people in wheelchairs, people on bikes, people on scooters. These streets are what we call the high injury network. Most of them are fast, wide roads where high-speed driving collides with everyday activities like crossing the street to catch the bus, with predictable and tragic consequences. Next slide, please. Of these streets, just 10 accounted for fully 1/3 of fatalities during the years we looked at. And I think you'll look at these streets and you'll see a lot of the places that you know throughout the city. And then you'll also see that these streets are concentrated in some parts of the city. They're not distributed evenly. Next slide. The high injury network is concentrated in parts of the city where families have lower incomes and where more people who rely on public transit to get to essential destinations live. So as we stay on this slide, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of this legislation as we view it. We believe our streets should value the lives of all people who use them. People of all races and ethnicities and backgrounds, people who walk, people who bike, people who use wheelchairs, and yes, people in cars. The emphasis, though, should be on equitable safety, and that means prioritizing the needs of the most vulnerable users. This Vision Zero legislation sets a default speed of 25 miles per hour for the city, and it will affect mostly neighborhood streets as well as some collectors and downtown midtown arterials that, as mentioned previously, are not on the state's list for laser enforcement. So a local street could be a neighborhood street like 8th Street or Custer Avenue, but not an arterial road like Cascade Road or DeKalb Avenue, and not a collector road like Hosea Williams or Huff Road. We see reducing the speed limit on neighborhood streets as an important first step, but it's just one part of making Atlanta safer for everyone. We need automated speed camera enforcement. We need protected crosswalks. We need protected bike and scooter or lit lanes. And we need just all the elements of safer roadway design that will take a more comprehensive approach to public safety. Everywhere we go in the community, people ask us, how can I make streets safer for my family, for my neighbors, for my community, for the city? So I want to take a second to just imagine something with you all. What would it be like if a mom felt comfortable, completely comfortable, letting her son bike to school? None of her neighbors judged her. The other parents didn't call her to tell her where her kid was. What would it be like if that child's grandparent could safely walk to the grocery store without having to worry about whether they can rush across the street fast enough to make it before the light changes and avoid getting hit? What would our community members accomplish if we removed the fear of getting from place to place and replaced it with the freedom of movement? So as a coalition, we understand that it takes collective movement to achieve these lofty goals. We're here to lift up residents who've been advocating, asking, and fighting for better sidewalks, better street lighting, traffic calming to lower speeds, and better intersections, not just for a few years, but for decades. We're here to elevate the communities that want safe streets, that help local businesses grow, residents connect, and communities thrive. That's why we've worked with residents, neighborhood groups, NPUs, and other advocacy organizations like PEDS and AARP to create a coalition for safe streets. So looking at the future of Vision Zero in Atlanta, this legislation is a great starting point for our entry into this global movement of cities that are aiming to reduce traffic fatalities and serious injuries not just by a percentage, but to zero. And thank you. Looking forward to Robin sharing the insights from another Vision Zero city. So in order to get to this goal, we have to back up our stated commitments to sustainability and equity, and we have to make commitments to the policies and investments that are needed to move the needle and reach this goal. When we have limited resources to invest in our infrastructure, which is always, but it's now more than ever, we need to spend first on the streets where people are being killed and seriously injured and prevent people dying in traffic. And a word on enforcement, it's a double-edged sword. While dangerous drivers should be held accountable, we're concerned about the potential for targeting Black and Brown communities. So we support automated enforcement, meaning the use of technology such as speed and red light cameras to make streets safer in a more systemic way that avoids traffic stops. And we are really pleased that speed cameras are now allowed in Georgia in school zones. That's a great place to start since they protect the most vulnerable first. Finally, as we think about safe streets during the coronavirus pandemic, could safe streets be more important than ever during a time of shelter-in-place orders, social distancing, and restricted movement? Our hospitals and healthcare workers are already dealing with so much. We can support them by preventing crashes and not placing that additional burden on the people in the healthcare system. As an Atlanta sanitation worker said on the radio this morning, vehicle traffic is lighter, but pedestrian traffic has kicked up. Less traffic means it's easier to speed without even meaning to. If you're driving, please slow down and protect your neighbors on foot, bike, and wheelchairs. Use this opportunity to see what it's like to drive 25 miles per hour within the city. Thank you, and we'd like to show a brief video, an interview with a community member right now.
Everett and Zena, do you guys have a video? Where would the video be, Rebecca? Oh, it's coming. You see, I'm no talk show host yet. I don't know all the magic behind all this. Okay, let's do this. Rebecca, I think they're trying to make something happen. Let's move on to Eunice Glover, and then we'll, when they get it ready, Rebecca, they'll let us know. Okay. All right. So Ms. Glover, thank you for being here. Ms. Glover is a great community resident that has led a lot of committees, and she's on the NPUI leadership. She's also an APAB vice chair, Atlanta Planning and Advisory Board vice chair. She's an active, I don't know if we call her a senior. She's just a young lady that gets out in the community and power walks all over Southwest Atlanta. So she uses these streets actively, these streets that have sidewalks sometimes, but don't have sidewalks sometimes. And she continues to communicate to us the need for safe streets. So we thought it would be great to hear from her. So Ms. Glover, just let us just talk to everybody about your thoughts on Vision Zero.
Thank you very much for having me. Atlanta is one of the most beautiful cities in the country. And I've often heard it compared to New York, the New York of the South. When it comes to the beauty, the green canopy, It makes you want to be outside. And Atlanta is also the top city in the country for the senior population. We have a huge number of seniors. And in 2014 through 2016, AARP did a study driven by age-friendly community. What the survey revealed is that the top quality of life element is transportation. And it meant all forms, walking, cycling, and that's what seniors wanted to see. Their second was outdoor spaces and buildings, your sidewalks and your parks. And I speak about the AARP program, but please note, this is not a generational factor. Everybody wants to be out walking, riding safely. I can personally share a very recent experience with you on my beloved Benjamin E. Mays Drive. But I also must first thank Commissioner Rowan for getting that street fixed. That street had me out walking on the sidewalk, running on the sidewalk. It's like nothing else you can experience. And I must say, as an ex-long distance runner, it had me back in time. It was beautiful. But I do share with you that my beloved Benjamin E. Mays Drive can at times be Indy 500. Even on the days in early March when I was walking, cars were speeding on that 2-lane road. And it makes it very unsafe for all. People want to be outside walking, and as I've heard earlier, you have more people walking since COVID-19 than ever before. That is not going to change. Unfortunately, the speed seems to have gone up higher on many of the roads. That will change with Vision Zero. And so I support it. I love everything the city has done. The mayor's desire to have this, Councilmember Dickens, your leadership in the Transportation Committee, all of the members on that committee, Commissioner Rowan, all of the wonderful people who had this idea of making a major change in transportation in the city of Atlanta. I thank you. I stand here to help you in any way I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Glover. We really appreciate your perspective on this. And you are right. A lot of people are communicating about how these roads during COVID are now turning into Indy 500. And even before COVID, sometimes they were Indy 500. People are speeding too fast on our roads. So Vision Zero is going to seek to improve that and reduce those speeds, but also there's more to it with street design as well. So now, thank you, Ms. Glover. So now we will hear from Doug Joyner with Safe Routes to Schools. This is to hear about how our youth go to school. Many of them walk or ride a bicycle, and Doug Joyner can take it away and let us know his thoughts about Vision Zero.
All right, well, thank you. I appreciate being here, and I appreciate this town hall. Actually, from 2012 to 2016, I was contracted to do work in a 10-county City of Atlanta region related to safe routes to school. So I guess I must have left an impression because I'm here today talking about safe routes. And actually, happy to say that I did that work without owning a vehicle. So it is possible to use mass transit and alternate means of getting around in the city of Atlanta. During that time, I discovered two major issues. One is the lack of parental engagement and health and safety programming regarding children getting to and from school in low wealth communities, particularly in South Side Atlanta. The other thing I discovered is the absence of children and youth in the transportation planning process. Through study, I've discovered that these two particular issues are locally, regionally, and nationally. So back in 2017, from the work that was done with Safe Routes, I approached Georgia Tech School of Public Policy and had a group of students take a look at the first issue of low wealth communities in South Side Atlanta. And what that culminated in was the creation of a program called Children as Commuters. We had been doing that work, and lo and behold, the school system came up with a turnaround strategy. So I did an overlay of the work that we were doing in the community and their overlay strategy, or their turnaround strategy. And if you go to the next slide, please. Found a complete alignment and a mechanism through their APS's wellness program to actually create a health and safety wellness cluster-wide program as Children as Commuters. The bold letters that you see, the titles, are the turnaround strategies. The print below is how the program applies itself and aligns itself to those activities. The studies have shown there is a disconnect between low wealth community parents and public school systems. And so this effort is more geared toward a community-based approach and collaborative. Next slide, please. The boxes that you see going across the top of the page, walking and biking, impact measures, these are the things, these are the elements of the Children as Commuters program. The training, and we've the list of people that you see on the left are particular groups of folks that we have partnered with during that period of 2012 to 2016. I might add, though, that today, well, not today, the virus has changed that, but there were and still are schools, TAG Academy, Dunbar, Obama Academy, Jones, others, that are still participating in this program and doing so without any fiscal or policy support from APS or the City of Atlanta. We have found that the method of community engagement, the bonding, the bridging, and the linking creates sustainability. So we're happy to say that those programs on the South Side are still in existence. The area of health and safety zones, I'll give you one example. The Atlanta Beltline has 19 schools within a half mile of the Beltline. 11 of those are elementary schools. And from the work that we did earlier, it's easy to create and find where the children are coming from and the streets and methods by which they get there. And those become health zones within that half mile to a mile radius, determined by the collaborative group, that group on the left, where it says collaborative policy table. This is a community and a collaborative effort to create the possibility for children to walk not just to and from school, but anywhere within their community safely. Parental engagement, of course, you don't do anything without parents if you're dealing with children. That's enough said. And again, this is a cross-sector safety partnering perspective. Next slide, please. The program has 4 phases. There are very concrete roles, very concrete tasks that get accomplished. I come from a background of running Joint Commission hospitals, so I'm accustomed to reviewing constantly, internally and externally, and that process exists throughout these 4 phases of activity in the program. Next slide. Again, this is a community-based, community engagement program. I'll give you an example. The parents that were doing the walking at TAG, one of them became the PTA president. So what we do is we get people more engaged officially through the PTA. She started a bicycle club. So again, the studies show community-based programs tend to work more in low-wealth communities with the public school system. Public school recruitment of parents and sustainability has shown not to work. In fact, this picture, we started out in Gideon's in the Pittsburgh neighborhood. Some of you may recognize Pierre. This is when he was with partnership, the Pittsburgh Community Improvement Association. So what we did is we partnered with the city, with the Center of Hope, and they're strategically placed within walking distances of schools and homes. So we started an after school walking school bus. This is one group, and again, this is a partnership between the City of Atlanta, Atlanta Public Schools, a neighborhood organization, and at that time, Safe Routes. The idea is, again, getting a community to take a look at taking care of its children, and not just to and from school, but through that collaborative effort wherever children are. The next slide, please. So I personally am involved with the UNICEF USA Child Friendly Initiatives Expert Group. That work completely aligns with the 2 issues that are being addressed here. And so I went back this semester to Georgia Tech and have a second group of students that are taking a look at the issue of the absence of children and youth in transportation. They're asking the question, or answering actually, the question, which methods of incorporating youth participation are best suited to achieving optimal youth engagement in municipal and community planning practices relevant to transportation? In fact, you mentioned Minneapolis. Through this work, met Millicent, who's the Commissioner of Public Health up there, and they have an example of a youth council that works with city council members in terms of being engaged. So this group of students from Georgia Tech, I've asked them to look at a national, international best practices to answer that question. They are presenting their final presentation of that work in about a week, and the information is there. I have sent invite outs to some of the folks that are on this call, so we're certainly looking forward to that presentation and the exposure of adding children to this process. And it doesn't have to be just transportation, I mean, just community planning and community development practices.
Good.
I think as I look at this I guess the last thing to say is when it comes to Vision Zero, if there's going to be a safe, equitable system created, it has to come from municipal leadership first. It has to include planners and designers, enforcement, the business community, and people in general, and an intentional fiscal investment from the perspective of children. I think that covers it.
All right. Good. Well, thank you very much, Doug Joyner. You have always looked out for our youth as they go to school and to our neighborhood resources and to home. So we wanted to make sure your voice was lifted here as we talk about Vision Zero. Children are commuters, and I like that. And Marcy Collier Overstreet, our council member of District 11 and Vice Chair, she wrote in the chat, she likes the school bus, the walking school bus idea as well as I. So that's great. So thank you for that. Thank you to each of you. We have one more speaker that we need to get to, which is very important. She's not in Atlanta, but she is an authority on this very issue. So I'm going to go over to Robin Hutchinson. Robin, please let us know about Vision Zero and things that you've seen across the country, and give us an example.
Thank you, Council Member. Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. I'm hearing so many familiar stories and experiences and so much familiar work from the staff there. And I want to start by saying that Vision Zero takes a tremendous amount of leadership and dedication, and I'm seeing that all the way through from council members to the commissioner and to your community who's also speaking. We had a very similar experience in Minneapolis. I am the Public Works Director for the City of Minneapolis. I am also the president of the board of the National Association of City Transportation Officials, or NACTO. I was pleased to see a few references to NACTO. Great resources that we use. It sounds like you're using them too. NACTO is an association of 83 major cities and transit agencies that have come together to exchange ideas in transportation and to create safe and sustainable and equitable transportation choices for people. Vision Zero is a hallmark initiative of so many cities who are NACTO members. In Minneapolis, when I arrived there, I was in Salt Lake City as transportation director there before I joined the city of Minneapolis. And when I arrived in Minneapolis, the city, to me, was very ready to consider Vision Zero. In 2016, we started the effort. In 2017, the city council adopted it as policy. We accelerated our work on our infrastructure to make walking and biking safer. We worked with our communications agency to help to educate folks on behavior change. We worked so closely with our police department, but the one thing that had eluded us is the ability to lower our speed limits, even as we saw that our crash data supported it. So if you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So first things first, we went to the data. 70% of severe and fatal crashes on 9% of the streets. That helped us to focus. In looking at this data, speed was almost always a factor in the crash, especially as it related to severe injury and death. We also saw that many of the issues that we had are on streets that the city doesn't currently control. So county. For us, it's county. For you, it sounds a little more like state. You can go to the next slide. So we put that together with what we know about speed and safety and we know the risk of severe injury and death is so much higher at higher speeds. So we sought to do the heavy lift to change state legislation that would give the city the authority to change speed limits. The state, for many years, I think forever, controlled all speed limits in the entire state and set it at a default of 30 miles an hour. So every street in Minneapolis was either 30 miles an hour or higher. We tried in 2017 to change the legislation to give local control. We tried in 2018, and in 2019, we were successful. And it's a great story that I love to tell, and I'll just say it briefly, is that we started by saying the cities of the first class, so Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rochester, and Duluth, and a state legislator from a rural area in Minnesota said, no, this is all cities everywhere, and expanded it to everywhere. Every city in the state now has the authority to set their own speed limits. That was a victory for us. We want to solve the crash problems that we have. We want to reach our Vision Zero goals. We have to lower the speed limits. So that was the last legislative session. We took about 6 months to do the analysis. I can't remember what my next slide is, but maybe we could go to it and I'll just speak to whatever's there. We took about 6 months to do the analysis. We took over 400 traffic counts citywide to understand what our average speeds were, always relying on the data. We decided to implement a two-tier system, and that's based on data. When we collected all of that data, we saw that average speeds about 50th percentile, so not using 85th percentile anymore. 50th percentile was about 22 miles an hour on local or residential streets, and on our arterials, it was more like 27 or 28 miles an hour. So we decided to take a two-tier approach. Our residential streets are now all going to be 20 miles an hour. Our arterials are going to be 25 miles an hour. We've got a couple of outliers that function more like freeway on-ramps that are still 35, but those, it's less than a mile or so of that. We are in the process of doing that changeover now. We've got staff working on it. Even during COVID, it's still somewhat solitary work to make a sign and install a sign. We have rolled out much of the 25 mile an hour network. It's been a delight to see people's reaction to it as their signs are being changed from 30 to 25. When we're done with that, we'll then announce the default on the local residential streets, which we are not going to sign. And we anticipate being done with the entire process by the end of October. We are thrilled. We had, again, leadership at so many levels from the state, our city council and our mayor, tremendous amount of support and leadership. Our community came out in force and supported us and did the heavy lifting of lobbying and convincing those who we really needed to convince. We had a celebration, I think it was the last week of February, so just before I think the week, if we had planned it a week later, we wouldn't have been able to gather. So this is real time happening in Minneapolis. Celebrated at late February, came together on a very rainy day with our community members and our staff. Minneapolis, if we're going to be successful, and we are rolling it out pretty quickly. I'll stop there. I think I've got one more slide. 20 is plenty. Simple yard signs going up everywhere. This is helping to communicate to folks and is creating a lot of community excitement. So 20 is plenty for us. So delighted to see and thrilled really to see your strategic plan, how Vision Zero is so central to your strategic plan. And if there's any way that NACTO can support, or we can connect you to staff at City of Minneapolis, we are here for you.
Robin, thank you so much. This is so helpful for us to see another city doing just what we're aiming to do. We're a little bit behind you guys, but we are
doing great.
We're coming along.
You are doing great. It's hard work, and you're doing the hard work.
Good. I did have two quick questions. So those signs, who's producing those, the 20 is plenty signs? Is it the city or is it an organization? Because we might want to have a advocacy campaign like that as well.
The city is producing them and distributing them.
Okay.
We've never done that before. It's new and it seems to be effective.
All right, Josh, you better find some money so we can do that in Atlanta. So tell everybody a little bit about NACTO. Just everybody is not familiar with that acronym, just so they know that it's a national body and what you guys do.
So the National Association of City Transportation Officials is a organization that brings together, right now it's 83 members open to large cities, affiliate cities, which are smaller cities, and transit agencies. Atlanta's a member. Great. Josh and I know each other from board meetings. And it really is an informational exchange between cities, and it's a place where best practice is gathered and published in a set of guides that cities are now using. The organization has been around for a long time, but really accelerated and took shape over the last 10 years or so. And the very first thing that came out was the Street Design Guide. It was wildly popular among cities and really helped cities in particular rethink their streets outside of what the typical guidance gave, which was the Green Book, if everybody knows that, or what the federal government sort of, how they thought about highways, which isn't always applicable in city settings. So NACTO's members all participate in the exchange of ideas and the development of new standards for cities to apply in transportation. It is all about sustainable transportation choices with a focus on equity and safety and climate. It's a very staff-driven organization. A staff of 20 or so help us cities do our work and help us to share information and further the best practice.
Good deal. Good.
Thanks for asking.
No, I wanted everyone to know just that there are national resources that kind of get together and discuss things that are for the benefit of most major cities. So thank you for your leadership on NACTO. Thank you for making sure that Josh Rowan knows what to tell us to do.
He knows. He's in the inner NACTO circle. You're in good hands.
We're in good. All right, good deal. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation today.
Yes, thank you. All right, thank you all for being great stakeholders and presenters. We did accumulate a lot of questions. Josh, I'm going to throw one to you, which came about regarding ADA compliance. So it came from Jennifer Brooks. She was asking about, how does Vision Zero, how does the Department of Transportation take ADA compliance and those that are in wheelchairs and other devices?
Sure. So I think the thing to remember here is that Vision Zero is applying to all users. So it's whether you're in a car, whether you're on a bicycle, whether you're in a wheelchair. And I would just share with you a quote from the strategic plan, which I think spells it out very clearly. This plan is not just about creating a new agency. It is about focusing our efforts to improve the way the transportation system works for every Atlantan every day. We must protect our children and seniors from traffic violence. We can build a better sidewalk network so everyone can get where they need to go by foot or wheelchair or stroller. We don't have specific stroller goals, but it's very clear that we're talking about all users of the street system. And when the vision is zero fatalities, well, that clearly includes everyone. So one thing that I will also share, letting the cat out of the bag a little bit, is we have some tremendous resources within the group formerly known as Department of Public Works. One such individual you heard from today, Betty, is our Vision Zero champion. We have another individual who we are more than likely going to establish as our ADA champion within the Department of Transportation to support the Vision Zero effort. So ADA is clearly front of mind. And if any of you follow me on Twitter, I've spent quite a bit of time with James Curtis, and then 2 weeks ago at Carton of Milk in Midtown walking around, and we've got a lot of work to do. We're in fact looking at some of our Renew funding in Midtown that we have set aside for ADA improvements, and how can we go ahead and get that moving now? So I think it's very clear that ADA is part of this program.
Good. Thanks, Josh. Thanks. I was reminded that the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition had a quick video to show. That video is now ready. We're going to show that video, and then I'm going to read off some of the questions that have come in, staff has been taking. So please play the video. All right. Well, we tried. We tried to bring us to the 21st century. Didn't happen well. So looks like the video is probably not working well with Zoom. So Rebecca, if you're still around, I want you to kind of tell people how they can see this video. Please unmute Rebecca if you can. Everett, unmute Rebecca so that she can tell us how we can see that video. And then those folks that are on Facebook can definitely go see it. Rebecca?
Thank you, Councilmember Dickens. Everett posted the link in the chat. If you can see the chat, there's a link right there.
Okay.
And we'll post it on our social media as well.
Oh yeah, you cannot read off that.
I'm not going to read that.
There's a lot of stuff. All right, so everybody take a look in the chat and you'll be able to see it. And then Everett or Paige or Kelsey copy that into Facebook so people can see that on their own. Apologies, Atlanta Bicycle Coalition, but your video will get seen by folks outside of this Zoom. Okay, number of questions. I'm going to read some of them or most of them, and I want Josh, you and your team to answer them. My staff has been collecting the questions that you've placed inside of the chat, either on Facebook or the chat on Zoom, or the emails that have come in or the calls that have come in. And so I'm looking at about maybe I would say 18 questions or so. Some have already been answered. So one question, well, I'll read two of Marnie Becker's questions from Facebook, and they're on about general safety. Has the city considered launching a media campaign geared towards millennials about speeding? And so I'm sure your answer is going to talk about millennials as well as others who speed. And then the other question is, what active traffic calming measures are being considered for collectors? So Josh, do you or someone on your team want to speak to this?
Sure. So yes, we are planning an education campaign. I wouldn't say it's specific to millennials because there are plenty of individuals in all age categories speeding on the city streets. So right now it's more of a general slow down campaign. As far as the changes to the streets go, there are a lot of options that we have, and we're really looking at working with NACTO to develop a guide for the city. So anybody who's seen me publicly knows I'm a fan, maybe not a fan of the phrase, but I like the road diets. I like the 4-lane to 3-lane conversions. I like things like refuge medians for pedestrians, signalized mid-block crossings, anything that narrows a lane and provides a safe passage for our pedestrians. We're actively pushing forth Mayor Bottom's action plan for safer streets to install the protected lit lanes within the city. So if Doug, if you'd like to jump in, we are certainly evaluating a number of street changes and how we would roll that out citywide.
Perfect. So to jump on 2 points, I think someone had made this point in the chat that one of the biggest levers, if not the biggest lever we have, is engineering. And to that point, one program that we're working on now, and one that we will be coming legislatively in the future. The first one that's in the works now is the Action Plan for Safer Streets, which we looked at what were some of the widest road, kind of what was a low-hanging fruit to take a lane from vehicles and move it towards a protected bike lane. And we identified mileage throughout the whole city in coordination with Atlanta Bicycle Coalition and some other stakeholders to try to rapidly deploy bike lanes. So historically in Atlanta, if you called up Midtown Alliance, who's been trying to put a bike lane on Juniper for 10 years, it takes forever to get this infrastructure out on the road. We've challenged ourselves to get it out much faster. And one of the first street that will be a lane will be taken on will actually be Spring Street in the next couple of weeks. Will be repaved from 14th to 3rd. We'll be taking a lane. So right there where a lot of Georgia Tech students scooter on the sidewalk to class, now they'll be able to have a protected bike lane there, and that will slow traffic down through that part of Midtown. There's a bunch of other streets on the plan: Juniper, Piedmont, from 14th all the way through Georgia State to the Georgia Capitol. West Peachtree, Cherokee is there as well. We're going to do part of DeKalb, and then phase 2 of that, we're currently working on that to develop which streets those would be. But it's streets like RDA, Ralph McGill, Pryor. So Pryor is a street that is a wonderful north-south route, but it's absolutely terrifying to go down. Another street is Whitehall, which would be an important connection between West End and downtown. So there's a lot of streets that we're going to be putting this. There was actually an engineering study, I want to say Colorado State did it, that the single most effective thing you can do to reduce severe injuries and deaths is a protected bike lane on the street. So that's one of the things that we'll be prioritizing from an engineering standpoint. And then the second thing legislatively that we're working on now, it's not yet ready for prime time because we need to actually write the legislation and do a little bit more legal research, is that the current traffic calming policy of the city was done in the 90s and says you can only do vertical deflection, which is like speed humps and speed tables, that sort of thing, on local roads. And yet the best practice from talking with NACTO and some other cities is that you can do them on collectors and even minor arterial roads. Currently, we're not legally allowed to do that according to the city code. So we're going to study it a little bit further. We need to talk to the fire department, for instance, and make sure that they're comfortable with whatever we do, because they have to have their trucks go over whatever we put in the road. But basically build a stakeholder group internally and externally to get moving on the next piece of legislation. And actually there's going to be a bunch of legislation that comes through in different pieces to try to move us closer to the Vision Zero goal. And expanding the traffic calming is one of those pieces.
Hey, Doug, I don't want to cut you off, but I'm not trying to have a NACTO meeting right now.
Okay.
You gave the full answer. Yes, right. Yes, but the point is there's multiple ways to do this, and we're going through traffic calming measures as it's necessary, using the right instrument on the right streets as we can, but it's difficult and it takes time. But you gave some great examples. People do know Juniper and how long it's taking. All right, so I appreciate that. I'm going to pivot and go to some enforcement questions, and I'm going to try to line these up together. So Deputy Chief Peak, if you can kind of be available for a portion of this, but also anyone who kind of knows some of the law behind it. So I'm going to ask this question. So, yeah, There's one about, can you expand a bit on Sally Flock's question or comment about the Georgia Code not authorizing automated speed enforcement? We talked about that earlier a little bit, about 25 miles per hour and Georgia Code not authorizing automated speed. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. There was another question along the same lines of, what is the purpose of the law that removes the ability of using lasers when the speed limit is changed? Why was that put in place originally? And I think that's a state law. And then there's one about, laser has been done in the past on Bolton Road and James Jackson Parkway. What happened? And Councilmember Hillis may know about that if Major P, well, you're not Major Peak, your Deputy Chief Peak doesn't. So Deputy Chief Peak, do you want to take on some of those questions related to radar detectors, speed enforcement?
Okay, well, sure. So just to kind of give a quick background to it. So again, the state governs all laser and enforcement maneuvers when we're utilizing technology. And reason being, just being real, there were some jurisdictions once upon a time that were setting up illegal speed traps and not abiding by what they needed to do. And it was particularly for strategic enforcement purposes as opposed to life and safety. So the state stepped in and they put those rules into place. And so what ends up happening is, for us to get that list of streets that are governed by the state to authorize us to utilize laser detection, the state has to come out and conduct an analysis of that area to say that, you know what, this street is either long enough for the 500-foot distance or has a 7% grade that's not going to be violated. So that naturally when cars go downhill, they pick up speed. So there were agencies who would say, okay, well, I'll give everybody a ticket that's going down the street and goes over the speed limit. And in addition to that, when we look at the 25, there's a specific gap to say that we can't write citations until we allow a person at least 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. So these were all things that the state of Georgia put in place. And so ultimately, if we violate those steps, then the city of Atlanta loses its ability to write citations altogether through laser enforcement. As for the Jackson Parkway, Bolton Road, to my knowledge, there's nothing stopping us so long as it's still on the actual list of the state, and that's something that I'd have to follow up and should take a look at to see if it's still on the list. But if there's a location, oftentimes we get requests for locations, but they're not on the list. So we have to come up with other maneuvers such as visibility patrols and or pacing. But enforcement is something that we generally try to work around as well as we can to ensure that we stop the issues. Hopefully that answers.
Yes, that did. Thank you very much. And we can see about the Bolton Road specific question from Ola Reynolds, our great MPUG leaders over there, and Dustin Hillis may be able to talk specifically to that if it's a possibility, you know, whether we want to go forward with doing some of that. Okay, so those were our enforcement questions. That was news to me. I did not think about why it was put in place to begin with, but that makes sense. Let's go down here to benefits of Vision Zero. Matthew from Facebook says, how does this affect the business community? Mr. Nagy or anyone? How will the business community benefit from Vision Zero?
I mean, ideally, their customers and their workers can get there safely and then get home safely, so it could come to work and come to shop the next day. So I think it'll be positive for them. Everyone faces risks in our society, and so that's generally what I would say. I don't think there's anything specific for the business community that would be negative. I think it'd be positive for all.
Okay. All right. Oh, Josh has an answer. Let's leave Josh unmuted. Josh, you're just going to stay unmuted so that you can answer. So be careful. Everett, yes, there you go.
Yeah, and to add on to Doug's answer, another benefit to the business community, we actually met with Atlanta Rotary, and one of the comments that they made was that they're seeing a workforce that wants to live in town. So that as the urban core continues to become denser, the safety really becomes a critical factor because the workforce is choosing to live in town and walk or ride a bike to work.
Got it. Good point. That's good. All right, so now let's keep moving. Jordan S. has asked this question in the chat no less than every 5 minutes. He's asked about during COVID, can Atlanta open up the streets since it's lower volume? And can we just close the streets to cars and allow people to occupy the streets? And I think he was asking about Minneapolis. And then can we do something similar to that here in Atlanta? Have we considered that, Josh? Josh, you're on mute still.
Sorry about that accident. We actually did look at pop-ups and as well as road closures. The challenge that we faced was that simply we didn't feel we had the resources to do it. We also didn't feel we could do it in an equitable way. And then lastly, for fear that, depending on what location we look at, that we didn't want to create a public health hazard at a time where we were encouraging people to stay off the Beltline and use that as a transportation corridor. So ultimately, we opted to just focus our resources on the projects we already had in the program. And Doug had mentioned those, many of the protected bike lanes that we already have programmed. So that was a decision we made essentially based on equity and resources.
All right, good. All right. Oh, this was a question I was going to ask back with the speed limit and speed enforcement. So this is again back to you guys, maybe Betty or somebody. Has City Council, well, I guess it's me. Has City Council considered lobbying the state to allow streets with high pedestrian numbers, such as Edgewood Avenue or parts of North Highland, to have lower speed limits? Well, we're going to be moving those to 25 miles per hour in this process as well. This is our approach, but if we need to lobby the state on doing, I guess I'm not understanding if, is there more to this than, he's saying in the chat to lower it to 15 miles per hour. Is that a goal of ours, Josh, to get to 15 miles per hour on a street like that? Or are we going to see how 25 goes first?
Well, the reason we hit 25 is that's as low as we're allowed to go per state law right now. And I think when we reference talking about the state, there are really two aspects of this. There's the GDOT, which has been a tremendous partner so far. We've met multiple times with the commissioner and the chief engineer to share our plans, and what they've said is they want to find mutual safety victories both on city streets as well as the state route. And then there are issues related to state law, which obviously would take action from the legislature. So more discussion will have to be had there.
Okay. So Benjamin is asking if we would lobby to do that. We could. I think the first step is going to be regarding lobbying as it relates to the radar at 25 and below. And then I'll see what the council member, Amir Faroki, that's over that district, and Adeline Archibald think about 15 on those streets in conjunction with Josh and Betty and others and Nagy. All right, let's go on to another question. So we answered that. Let's go back up to general question. Oh, this is a Minneapolis question. Laura Dobson, and this will be Minneapolis needs to answer. Does Minneapolis have adequate sidewalks, ADA compliant? What width are those sidewalks? And how does this play into Vision Zero? Robin.
We have very standard sidewalks. I think they're adequate in some areas and not adequate in other areas. We have a full ADA transition plan that was adopted last year that we've started to roll out with every construction project. It's challenging if we build out the full ADA transition plan all at once. We pretty much can't do anything else in our budget. So we're finding a way to accelerate on the ADA transition plan while also still being able to move ahead on additional safety improvements that benefit everyone, whether they're walking or rolling or biking. Back to the COVID question, where we focused our efforts in Minneapolis in areas where we don't have enough sidewalk width to accommodate more people walking. And in some areas, we've reclaimed some of the street back and made it into extended sidewalk, more or less, to give people the space that they need to walk 6 feet apart. But the walking system, many people know this about me. I sometimes get tagged as a bicyclist, and it's not that I don't ride a bike, I do, but mostly like walking is the thing that I love the most and I do the most of, and I walk the most for transportation. So I'm always attentive to what my walking environment is like, and we have work to do in Minneapolis, just like every city.
Okay. One question from Ben in the chat. Do you perceive this confinement time to be an opportunity to double down on the engineering aspects of speed control? So basically, while we're on quarantine here, can we get some additional work done in the engineering side of things?
And I'll take that one, Councilmember Dickens. I think it's important to understand that these capital projects don't happen overnight. So we have our Renew Atlanta T-SPLOST program with a number of complete streets moving into construction, Cascade being the first one, followed closely by Howell Mill and Fairburn Road. So we're continuing to advance those projects. Doug had mentioned the action plan for safer streets. So we're advancing the programs we have, but this pandemic has done nothing to our approved budget. So the projects and the programs that we have are very much locked in right now. It's not like we found excess funds to go do extra projects. We have some very significant projects that we're moving forward. The benefit that we've seen with the reduced traffic is we're seeing faster productivity on the construction end. Now on the pre-construction end, we still go through the same process to design, to permit, to relocate utilities and purchase right-of-way. So those projects are continuing to move, but this opportunity, so to speak, sort of hinges on the projects that are already in construction, and we're taking full advantage of the ones that are in the construction phase.
All right. So we are about to land this plane real soon to get out of here at 7:30, which would have been a 2-hour town hall. I guess there's just a couple of more questions in here. While I'm gazing through these questions that have been answered, most of them, are there any? Oh, one question, Josh, just for how much is this going to cost the city of Atlanta to do Vision Zero? Somebody emailed me that.
Well, so that's an ongoing thing. We talked about in the last transportation committee. We're going to be evaluating the sidewalk data that we receive from our evaluation. It's going to end up being billions in capital projects over the course of a generation. So this is, again, like I said, when we kick this off, this is the first step of many. So the commitment is going to be significant, and it's going to take significant capital investment over time, the course of 20, 30 years, to really see these results be sustainable.
And you would say, there was a question here about tying this into the comprehensive development plan. That's kind of what you're saying now, that this is not just a one-time thing. This is going to be in our go-forward planning, correct?
Yeah, at the end of the day, Councilmember Dickens, what we're talking about is a culture change. And we want this to change the way we view every project and every decision we make related to how we spend money in the streets. So safety is going to be front of mind, as well as equity. You know, we have a hard conversation coming with sidewalks. We have sidewalks that are in a state of disrepair, and we have parts of town that are lacking sidewalks entirely. And with limited resources, that those become very difficult decisions, but they're ones that we're going to have to make. And so again, when you think of Vision Zero, I really want people to think about we're changing the culture in Atlanta so that people think safety first.
Yep, and Betty, just because you're going to be running this, and your 6 E's, one of them is education. A few of the questions in here are about making sure that communications are going out to residents and businesses to let them know of the changes. Just kind of talk a little bit about that, and that'll kind of lead us to our next steps as we go to Monday for the council meeting.
Okay. So yes, I know one of the earlier questions was around whether we would sort of target some of the messaging towards millennials. And so again, I guess just to reiterate, Vision Zero is going to largely be data driven. And so we are going to incorporate data into every aspect of the program, including the education. And so we will definitely target messaging for those groups that we are seeing through the data and what we are considering to be high risk. So if we're seeing in the data that, you know, age groups 18 through 24 are largely some of the drivers who are involved in fatal crashes, then of course some of our messaging will be geared around that age group. And then as far as just overall engagement for Vision Zero, we are working on an engagement strategy now. We are working with NACTO regularly. We have actually weekly calls with them. So we are planning to have sort of a finalized engagement strategy, hopefully very soon. But that will sort of dictate what we do. It'll identify specific things such as having street teams. And, you know, of course, we're trying to keep in mind what's going on now with COVID. So that's very much going to change a lot of the way that we engage people. So we're going to have to get very technology driven in some of our engagement. But of course, you know, using street teams to go out and distribute materials and distribute educational materials and flyers, just give information to the public, you know, pedestrians and bicyclists and motorists for whatever campaigns we develop. And of course, we plan to develop campaigns that specifically target, you know, behavioral issues, so speeding. As we implement the speed limit reduction, we want to develop a campaign that goes along with that. That's very public and utilizing social media and all of our websites. And so, you know, our plans we'll have a lot of information on our website. We are actually working to develop a data dashboard that will be sort of public facing. So there's a lot of things that we're talking through and just starting to, you know, internally begin to develop. And so I think over the next several months, you'll start to see a lot from us.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. I did want to remind everybody about a task force that's going to be established. I think you mentioned that a little bit, Betty, but I want to put a big stamp on that. Well, actually, I'll let you guys do that in a second. There were a lot of questions in the chat and in my email and directly to Everett, my chief of staff, related to ADA compliance. I threw it to Josh. He answered about that. But you know, that is just part of One Atlanta and also part of this whole strategy for Vision Zero. It is not just about cars, not just about bicycles, but how people go about movement in this city, which definitely includes wheelchairs and ADA compliance and ramps. One thing that I passed legislation this year to look at just ADA around the city hall. So that's coming to an end. We have a task force of individuals from Shepherd Center and you know, visually blind and others, seniors and veterans and others, to just go around City Hall, tell us how we can make City Hall just more accessible for ADA. And so that will be coming out soon, the results of that task force and their decisions and things that we need to change around City Hall. But around our city streets, this team here is up to task to work on that. I'll let you guys kind of talk one last little bit about the task force. This is not the last time you're going to have public engagement related to Vision Zero, there's a task force. Josh or Betty, you want to just quickly tell us about this task force and how many people and what they're going to be charged to do?
So I'll defer to Betty on this one, but as she said, working with NECTO and our regional partners to get folks to the table who really have community leadership and technical expertise to guide this program as we move forward. Really approaching safety as a from a health perspective. And I'd mentioned in committee both the crashes on the streets, but as well as active transportation being something that to promote the health and well-being of the citizens. So those are my comments as far as that goes. And Betty, I'll let you wrap that one up.
Yeah, I think Josh pretty much nailed it. What we've seen in other cities is multidisciplinary engagement and collaboration really is going to be one of the driving forces behind the success of Vision Zero in Atlanta. And so as soon as the ordinance passes on the 20th, hopefully we'll see success with that. But as soon as that's done, we plan on starting to reach out to a lot of the prospective task force members without calling them individually because we haven't really engaged them at this point. But we've got about 20 to 25 or so organizations identified as being a part of the task force. And it includes almost 10 or so city departments and agencies, including law enforcement, health, technology, all of that great stuff. And then also including some of our regional and state partners, our regional transit partners, and of course, a lot of the health systems here in Atlanta. So it's going to be a broad spectrum of stakeholders that we plan to engage quite frequently. And they will really be helpful in developing the action plan and identifying best practices and really coming up with specific strategies for the near term, but also for the long term.
Great, great, great. Well, everyone, thank you all for being here. Thank you to all the presenters. This was a Zoom town hall also on Facebook. We maxed out Zoom at 100 people. We had somewhere over 51 at one time on Facebook and some other places. So there's more people that will see this. This has been recorded, and I don't know how we'll get it out to everybody, but we'll figure something out so that you can watch us all again go through this and share it with your folks. Mr. Nagy has a presentation that you can just look up Doug Nagy, N-A-G-Y, send him an email, he'll send you the presentation. But I also believe the presentation can be found on the City Council's website under the Transportation Committee. I'll find out where that is, but Doug Nagy has put in the chat, his email is dougnagy@atlantagA.gov, and you can get access to his presentation. Of course, you have the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition, Rebecca Serna, Sagira, Saba, they're all in here. You can find them riding around the city on their bicycles, or you can find them in Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and you can access them and ask them more questions. Doug Joyner with Safe Routes to School and all of his great work with children. You can find him as well. Eunice Glover, thank you so much for your leadership on NPUs as well as APAB board. Thank you for representing our senior community, our very active senior community that likes to walk and needs to be safe. Thank you for that. Thank you, Deputy Chief Peak, and all that you do at APD, and all of the men and women that represent us and keep us safe at APD, and let Chief Shields know that we appreciate her great leadership during this time, but always. So we appreciate you. Josh Rowan, thank you, and your team, Betty and Doug, for continuing to make sure that transportation, mobility, and safety are a priority in this city. Thank you, Mayor Bottoms. And I saw Jacob Zigabe, who is in here. He is the senior advisor to the mayor on all things related to transportation. A great Georgia Tech man, if I might say so myself. I helped something to do with all those great grades he got. Not really, he's awesome on his own. And then to my colleagues on council, Marcy Collier Overstreet, the vice chairwoman of the Transportation Committee, as well as Dustin Hillis of District 9 and a great public safety mind of our city. Glad you were here. To my staff and everyone that helped make this possible, thank you all. It's 7:30, that means we need to be doing something fun or eating. So take your pick, but we're about to close out the Zoom. And you can email me at adickens@atlantaga.gov if you have any future questions, or you can follow me at Andre for Atlanta on all platforms and ask away. Thank you all. We'll see you on City Council meeting on Monday, and we'll see you in person whenever this thing is over. See you guys. Take care. Be safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.